They say that if you stand near the moss-covered oak trees outside an abandoned plantation near Nachitoche. But here's the real question. Tonight, we're traveling along sun-drenched highways and fog-soaked swamps, plunging into two states that practically ooze haunted history. Keep your headlights on and your doors locked. Some roads once traveled never let you go. Texas was forged on gunpowder and cattle dust. In the mid-19th century, cities like Jefferson and San Antonio were booming commercial hubs, magnets for fortune hunters and killers. The Spanish missions, crumbling under the relentless sun, still smell faintly of candle wax and stale incense. Local archivists in Travis County swear they have cataloged more than 300 unsolved murders between 1865 and 1890 alone, many attributed to vagabonds, some supposedly involving secret cults. It was also a land where sacred Native American grounds were destroyed by gold miners. Apache and Comanche burial grounds, disturbed in the frantic search for silver or grazing land, gave rise to countless stories of vengeful spirits riding ghostly wild horses across the plains at dusk, with the hooves never touching the ground. Residents like Alma Rodriguez, an 81-year-old woman from Del Rio, say, "When the wind howls here, it's not the wind, it's voices. I've heard them all my life, calling, laughing, sometimes cursing. You learn not to respond." Louisiana, the whisper of the swamp. And then there's Louisiana, a state that seems perpetually humid, shrouded in vines and secrets. French and Spanish colonial powers planted their flags here over the centuries, superimposing Catholic saints on older African deities inherited from enslaved people. This melting pot gave rise to, and water, a spiritual tapestry woven with blood, bones, and veins drawn in cornmeal. New Orleans may steal the headlines, but it's the parishes near the Atchafalaya Basin where the shadows take root. Cajun families pass down ghost stories along with gumbo recipes. Lantern-lit cemeteries, crumbling crypts in the swamp, and wooden crosses half swallowed by kudzu are perfect settings for folklore. Father Henri Lacroix, a priest stationed near Opelousas since 1974, once remarked, "There are things in those swamps older than any church, older than this country. They don't kneel before Christ or fear holy water. They just watch." The restless nights of Texas. On the dusty outskirts of Marfa, beyond the end of the paved road, farmers have reported seeing columns of horsemen, not on horseback, but floating, their outlines shimmering like a mirage of heat. Their eyes, they say, burn like tiny embers. A faded 1878 diary belonging to Jedediah M. Clark describes, "On my third night camping near Pecos, I awoke to the sound of galloping horses, but no hooves touched the ground. From my sleeping bag, I watched them pass. 6 men with hollow faces, heads turning in unison to look at me, and then they were gone. In the morning, the sand was as cool as if it were still moonlit, even though the sun was shining brightly in the sky." Today, UFO enthusiasts sometimes mistake these sightings for alien phenomena. But for locals, it's much older. They'll say these are the Lost Rangers, Confederate deserters cursed to roam the state they betrayed. A Lady Carosa of Louisiana of Bayou Noir. Meanwhile, near the sleepy town of Marksville, there's talk of a woman seen gliding across the dark waters of Bayou Noir. Her dress is perpetually soaked. Her hair sticks to her face, and her sobs are so terrible they lure fishermen, only to have them disappear. Avoyelles Parish Coroner's records document at least 7 drownings since 1989, all with eerily similar details. Empty boats found adrift, untouched tackle boxes, and footprints that led back to shore, and then simply stopped. Lafayette folklorist Evelyn Thibodeau believes these stories are more than cautionary tales. There is power in telling. The swamp listens, and sometimes it responds by taking something from you. How these legends still live. Walk into any Spirit Halloween store in Dallas or Baton Rouge in September, and you'll find costumes dubbed Bride of the Bayou or Texas Ghost Ranger, cheap polyester echoes of real local legends. Popular horror games on Steam feature levels that look suspiciously like oil fields dotted with spectral cowboys, or swamp mazes with weeping women who chase the player if they back away. Not even the big studios can resist. The hit streaming series Dark Tides sets its 3rd season entirely in a fictional Louisiana parish, replete with gris-gris bags, ghostly lights, and a weeping ghost that mirrors the Lady of Bayou Noir. Meanwhile, haunted tourism in Texas is booming. Marfa's official visitor center distributes maps not only to art installations but also to alleged ghost sightings. People flock to the nighttime tours, hoping, or perhaps fearing, to spot a rider in the dark. So whose ghost stories touch us most? Whose nights are most dangerous? The endless whispering deserts of Texas, where ghosts ride without horses, or the damp, shadowy swamps of Louisiana, where the water can rise and pull us under? We're just beginning to peel back the layers. In the next chapter, we'll follow a trail of strange disappearances linked to an old plantation ledger found in East Texas. And then we'll cross state lines to a dilapidated sugar mill in Louisiana, where blood still seems to stain the walls. What do you think of this story so far? Have you ever visited Texas or Louisiana and felt something you couldn't explain? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your ghost stories too. Oh, and if you're enjoying this journey through America's darkest legends, consider sign up to join us as we uncover even more haunted stories. The ledger was discovered by pure accident. In the spring of 1994, a team of contractors was hired to demolish what remained of the Caraway estate outside Nacogdoches in East Texas. The main house had long since collapsed into a tangle of brick and ivy, but in what had been the basement, little more than a damp hole beneath rotting beams, they found an old iron safe sealed with a corroded latch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had darkened to a tar-like consistency, lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages brittle but surprisingly legible. The elegant, sinuous handwriting recorded the comings and goings of slaves bought and sold between 1837 and 1855. But as the entries progressed, they shifted from a stark inventory, names, ages, weights, to stranger notations, symbols that resembled broken wheels, verses of scripture written backward, and ominous phrases like "Night watchers restless, more candles needed," and "Voices below will not be silent." Local historian Thomas R. Green took custody of the ledger, intending to catalog it for the county archives. Within weeks, he lost weight, complaining of voices whispering to him at all hours. He told his wife that the pages seemed to rewrite themselves at night, with fresh ink running across the parchment in the moonlight. One morning, she awoke to find Thomas gone, the back door ajar, muddy footprints dragging toward the dense pine forest. Despite exhaustive searches, neither Thomas nor the ledger were ever recovered. To this day, hikers occasionally report spotting a hunched figure wandering among the loblolly trunks, clutching what appears to be a small brown book to their chest, muttering in a dialect no one recognizes. Across the border in Louisiana, about 50 miles west of Baton Rouge, stands the ruined shell of the LeBeau Mill, a once thriving sugar refinery that partially burned down in 1891, under circumstances never fully explained. Its brick chimney still juts skyward like a broken tooth. Locals insist that on humid nights, when fog rises from the river, figures can be seen moving between the charred arches, men with their sleeves rolled up to their elbows, dragging sacks of sugarcane to presses that no longer exist, their faces sweat-soaked and eerily expressionless, as if sculpted from wax. A longtime maintenance worker, Harold J. Clay, who oversaw the site in the late 1970s, claimed he often found tools laid out in neat rows every morning, even though he had locked them up the night before. He once came across a neat pyramid of milled sugarcane on the main floor, gleaming as if freshly milled, though no machine had turned it in decades. The mill legend has its roots in a documented strike in the summer of 1889. Overworked Creole workers and newly freed blacks demanded higher wages and shorter hours. The mill owner, Gaston LeBeau, refused. According to parish records, the dispute ended with 7 men dead, shot by hired guards. But stories passed down through families in Iberville Parish add darker details. Workers who disappeared without a trace, blood seen seeping between the floorboards weeks after the shootings, and a pungent odor of burnt molasses that lingered throughout the winter. Today, LeBeau Mill is surrounded by stern warnings against trespassing, but it remains a magnet for the curious. In 2016, a group of amateur ghost hunters from New Orleans documented a chilling sequence. One of their team members entered a ground floor chamber alone, filming with a handheld camera. The footage shows him stopping, head tilted as if listening, and then doubling over, vomiting violently. He staggers out moments later, eyes wide, claiming to hear a chorus of voices chanting in French, though none of the others heard anything beyond the usual creaks and groans. When they reviewed the tape, a barely audible whisper accompanied the footage, dozens of voices overlapping, repeating the same phrase in irregular cadence. Linguists later attempted to clean up the audio and suggested it sounded like, "Ne regarde pas derrière toi," don't look back. In Texas, the aftermath of Thomas Green's disappearance and the missing ledger has evolved into a small cottage industry. Supernatural podcasts dissect the case in exhaustive detail, often embellishing the story with lurid allegations. Some say Thomas's wife received nightly phone calls for months, with her late husband's voice on the line begging her to join him under the house. Others insist that state police found claw marks on the inside of Green's closet door, suggesting he hid there for hours in absolute terror before fleeing into the night. While these stories rarely appear in official records, they stubbornly persist in local conversation, giving rise to roadside attractions that capitalize on the morbid allure. A gift shop on Nacogdoches' main square sells caraway ledger candles, black pillars that supposedly ward off restless spirits, though they smell more like cheap patchouli than anything supernatural. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, LeBeau Mill's dark legacy has seeped into the wider culture in more subtle ways. An indie horror game released last year features a level set in a dilapidated sugar refinery, complete with rusted conveyor belts and spectral workers who whisper accusations in dialect as they pass by. A popular TikTok trend involves users challenging each other to say "LeBeau" 3 times into a dark bathroom mirror, supposedly summoning a shadowy figure who promises to sweeten your blood. Most of these clips end in nervous laughter, but thousands of comments pour in from viewers who swear something moved just behind the door while they watched. Historians like LSU's Dr. Corinne Baptiste caution against trivializing these stories. She argues that behind the campfire stories and viral memes lies a real history of exploitation and trauma that deserves to be soberly remembered. "Ghosts are memory," she wrote in an op-ed last year. "When we evoke them, we often stumble upon truths our communities are not yet prepared to face." Still, she admits there's a peculiar gravitas to places like LeBeau Mill. She once spent an afternoon there cataloging architectural features for a grant proposal and left shaken. "I felt watched the entire time, not maliciously, just observing, as if something there was curious to know why I had come." In East Texas, the stretch of highway between Lufkin and Nacogdoches has earned an ominous nickname over the years: Ledger Line. Truckers swapping stories at 24-hour diners describe seeing a man step out of the tree line, clutching a book to his chest, only to disappear in the glare of headlights. One driver recounted how, after braking hard to avoid hitting the figure, he found fresh, muddy footprints on the side of his truck's cab, even though he hadn't seen anyone approaching. A state trooper who has patrolled this corridor for more than a decade privately admitted that dashcam footage sometimes shows motion blur he can't explain, such as a cloak disappearing from view just behind the beam of light. Meanwhile, towns on both sides of the border continue to court the darker aspects of their histories for tourism. In Nacogdoches, a local brewery released a seasonal stout called Green's Folly, its label adorned with stylized script and a shadowy figure hunched over an open ledger. Near Iberville Parish, you can sign up for moonlight kayak tours that glide past the mossy pilings of LeBeau Mill, with guides telling increasingly sinister stories as you float over dark waters that seem to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Psychologists suggest there's a kind of collective catharsis in these stories, a way for communities to process generations of violence, greed, and guilt. Yet even the most rational visitors often confess to feeling unsettled long after they've left. One travel vlogger who documented both locations on a single trip described waking up in her Baton Rouge hotel to find small, muddy footprints on the balcony floor, like those of a barefoot child, even though she was on the 5th floor, with no adjacent railing. Her video ends abruptly, her voice trembling as she repeats, "I don't know how to explain this. I don't know how to explain this." The fascination endures, fueled by countless small details that refuse to be debunked. An anonymous letter published in a Houston newspaper in 2002 claimed the writer had been part of the team of contractors who discovered Caraway's ledger. He insisted the pages were never blank when first opened. Instead, they were covered from cover to cover in cramped handwriting, lines so dense they overlapped like a nest of snakes. "It felt like it was breathing," he wrote, "warm and moist in my hands. When we closed the box, it was cold again." As for LeBeau Mill, its stories spread like spores. Even high school students who have never set foot near the ruins tell versions of the tragedy in hushed tones at sleepovers. Stories of ghost workers, a woman in a torn white dress who stands just beyond the firelight, always weeping, always pointing toward the river. A boy from New Roads swore to his friends that, after mocking the story one night, he woke to find handfuls of sugar scattered across the sheets, wet and sticky, even though no one in his family had sugar in such a gross, raw form. So whose ghosts are darker, Texas or Louisiana? It seems less a contest and more a shared affliction, a reminder that the land remembers every cruelty inflicted upon it, echoing them through whispers, footprints, fleeting shapes at the edge of vision. And perhaps that's why we keep returning, why these places draw us in with a mixture of dread and longing. They offer not just scares, but the tantalizing promise of stumbling upon a hidden truth, a deeper, more ancient knowledge that waits patiently in the darkness. Because we're just beginning to untangle these threads. Ahead of us lies a deeper dive into the intertwined folklore of both states. Enigmatic folk songs passed down between Cajun shrimpers and Texas cowboys. Eerie similarities in symbols carved into church pews hundreds of miles away. And chilling accounts of people who disappeared near the water only to reappear days later, confused, their clothes soaked in brine, their eyes filled with something not of this world. Are you still with me? Then tighten your grip on your flashlight. In our next exploration, we'll delve into the forgotten rituals that may unite these haunted places, tracing the enigmatic markings found on barn doors in East Texas to coastal shrines in Louisiana, and listening to modern-day descendants who still whisper prayers meant to keep the ancient things dormant. In the small town of Doucet, Louisiana, a cluster of clapboard houses stretching along the slow-moving Bayou Teche stands a weather-beaten chapel whose doors rarely open to outsiders. Locals call it Sainte Rosalie, after a Sicilian saint brought by fishermen who settled here in the late 19th century, but the statues inside display strangely elongated faces, with eyes deeper set than those of traditional Catholic sculptures. On humid mornings, dark stains spread across the plaster walls, stains that reappear no matter how many times parishioners scrub them. Sometimes during Mass, people report hearing faint melodies floating through the rafters, not the organ, but thin, tremulous voices singing in a language none of them can identify. A faded register hidden behind the sacristy lists baptisms, marriages, and burials dating back more than a century. Interspersed among these notes are rudimentary sketches, a circle flanked by branching lines resembling horns, a three-pronged shape like a trident garnished with vines, and, most disturbing of all, an eye shedding a single tear onto a gnarled root. When asked about these drawings, Father Olivier, Sainte Rosalie's current caretaker, simply shakes his head. Old families, old promises, best left as they are. 2 states to the west in the rolling pastures between Crockett and Palestine, Texas, ranchers have long reported finding similar symbols burned into barn doors or carved beneath window frames. Many attribute it to mischievous teenagers, but others speak hushedly of watchers, entities that roam among the live oaks at dusk. One rancher, Samuel Deloach, discovered a perfect circle of blackened grass in his northern pasture last October, its edges so sharply defined they looked as if burned by a branding iron. In the very center lay a small, crudely carved wooden figure, its arms raised in supplication. When he picked it up, a group of ants attacked his hand, biting it so furiously that he dropped it with a scream. By morning the figure was gone, though he swears no wind strong enough to carry it ever moved that night. Stories like these whisper of a hidden continuity that weaves together the swampy sanctuaries of Louisiana and the sun-drenched farmlands of Texas, an older faith woven into both Catholic saints and Baptist hymns. Some claim it began with the arrival of enslaved West Africans who fused ancestral rituals with imposed Christianity, creating clandestine rites meant to appease spirits both new and old. Others point to indigenous ceremonies adapted under duress, surviving in half-remembered blessings whispered over cattle or children, meant to keep malicious forces at bay. In 1932, an anthropologist named Beatrice Hallam traveled through East Texas collecting folk songs. Most were the expected ballads of lost love and dusty roads, but one recording stood out. An elderly woman named Ida May, a resident of the Alto area, sang a lyricless melody, a low, lilting chant that rose and fell like breathing. Hallam's notes mention a curious detail. As Ida May sang, birds gathered along the fence, dozens of them perched in perfect stillness, their eyes fixed on the singer until she finished. The wax cylinder containing this song was later lost in a fire in the university archives, although fragments of Hallam's field diary survive. She wrote, There is a pull to this melody, as if it remembered being sung long before the Englishmen ever touched this ground. South of Lafayette, Louisiana, shrimpers sometimes gather at makeshift altars along the marsh, leaving offerings of bread, salt, and even small nets filled with coins. They don't call it voodoo. For them, it's simply tradition, a way to ensure calm waters and a bountiful catch. Yet the symbols painted on driftwood planks echo those found on Texas barn doors, the same sinuous curves and irregular spirals that scholars struggle to categorize. Linguists who have studied photographs speculate that these markings may be a Creole script, an accidental fusion of West African Adinkra motifs with Native American pictographs, filtered through generations of necessity and fear. One summer, a folklorist named Jeremy Powell decided to map the occurrence of these symbols in both states. He documented over 100 occurrences, from fence posts in Grimes County, Texas, to boathouses near Houma, Louisiana. His conclusion was cautiously formulated. It is as if two distinct yet parallel folk traditions have, over the centuries, maintained a silent dialogue, despite distance and cultural upheaval. What they communicate, however, remains stubbornly elusive. In Texas, driving county roads at night reveals more than just blinking eyes in the roadside vegetation. Drivers have reported seeing figures standing near fence gates, faces obscured by wide hats or shawls, hands resting on tall staffs marked with dangling amulets. Some believe these are simply weather-beaten scarecrows or illusions born of fatigue, but many accounts mention how these figures seem to turn and watch passing cars, heads swiveling with disconcerting smoothness. A trucker named Miguel Ortega recounted stopping near Trinity for a mechanical check one night. As he rounded his trailer, he noticed a tall silhouette near a barbed wire fence, its outline trembling slightly, as if distorted by the heat. When he shined his flashlight, there was nothing there, but at the edge of the beam, he glimpsed something moving away, not running, but gliding. Meanwhile, in Louisiana's sugarcane region, farmers still perform rituals with roots obscured by time. Some bury small glass bottles filled with iron nails and pieces of hair in the corners of their fields, a practice supposedly meant to trap evil forces. When questioned, they laugh it off, calling it an old joke about city dwellers, but their eyes often drift to the horizon, scanning the line where the mist meets the sugar stalks. A retired mill foreman, Paul Broussard, admitted to maintaining the custom every planting season. "My grandfather did it. He said it kept the rot away. Who am I to change what works? We have enough to worry about without tempting shadows." The persistence of these practices inevitably seeps into modern culture. True crime series set in the region often embellish local murders with references to folklore, depicting crime scenes adorned with enigmatic symbols that rarely appear in official case files. Horror films capitalize on this rich tapestry, blending spectral Texas horsemen with the ghosts trapped in the Louisiana swamps into a single grotesque mythology. Even streaming platforms thrive on documentaries that blend fact and fiction so seamlessly that you begin, like many similar threads, with a half-faded name on a marriage certificate. In the dusty records of the Polk County, Texas courthouse, a faded document dated October 2, 1871, records the union of Jean-Baptiste Savoy and Mary Ellen Grafton. Jean-Baptiste's name is written in elegant continental script, a remnant of French education, while Mary Ellen's signature is lost, suggesting hesitation, or perhaps lack of practice with pen and ink. Marginal notes indicate that Jean-Baptiste came from Louisiana, born near Port Barre, before heading west with a small wagon train in search of cotton and cheap land. Mary Ellen, a Texas native, was the daughter of a rancher known for lining his fences with talismans, bone symbols bound with horsehair, said to ward off lightning and other darker visitations. Together they established a modest homestead on the banks of the Trinity River, where they are said to have combined practices inherited from their heritage. Neighbors whispered of moonlit gatherings by the water, soft chants blending languages that were neither purely French nor any local English dialect. One morning, a fisherman found dozens of paper boats floating downstream, each carrying a burnt candle stub and stains of what he swore was dried blood. Although he reported it to the local sheriff, no investigation was conducted. People in that region were wary of tampering with waters already fraught with superstition. The Savoy lineage fragmented over the next generation. Some children remained in Texas, tending cattle and eventually selling riverfront lands to lumber companies. Others returned to Louisiana, lured by relatives who promised easier lives among the sugar plantations and bayous. Yet wherever they settled, vestiges of the old rituals lingered like burrs. A 1924 letter preserved in a Baton Rouge attic reveals a woman named Elise Savoy writing to her sister in Nacogdoches, imploring her to send more iron nails blessed on a certain feast day. Without them, she confided, the knocking returns and the little ones wake with scratches. These domestic confessions echo through generations. In the 1950s, a traveling nurse named Caroline Duga recorded peculiar birth customs among families with surnames like Grafton, Broussard, and Ledoux in rural Texas clinics. Mothers insisted on placing a shallow bowl of salt water beneath their cribs, changing it weekly with solemn care. They also tied small pieces of red thread to their baby's ankles, murmuring brief prayers under their breath, glancing nervously at the windows as they did so. Carolyn tried to document the precise words, but found that even when pressed, these women simply repeated, "It keeps things from getting shiny for them." Meanwhile, across the Sabine River, descendants of these intertwined clans maintained small garden plots surrounded by stakes carved with spiral symbols. Old men and women still sprinkle ashes on doorsteps at dusk. A folklorist named Henry Gosselin, compiling oral histories in the late 1970s, encountered an elderly woman living alone outside Opelousas who proudly displayed a heavy iron key she wore on a chain around her neck. When asked about its purpose, she gave a weak smile. "For doors that aren't shut tight, dear, and some doors are better left unopened." It might be tempting to dismiss these customs as mere echoes of harder times, protective habits born of a landscape once rife with fevers, invasions, and accidents. Yet every now and then, stories emerge suggesting something stirs in response to these ancient gestures. In the fall of 1988, a section of cattle fence near DeBoll, Texas, was found collapsed overnight. Its wooden posts charred at the base. Tracks led into the trees, but not the hoof prints of panicked steers. They were long, narrow impressions, almost like a person's bare foot, if that person had toes twice as long as normal and claws where nails should be. The rancher, Wade Linney, replaced the posts and doubled his salt lines, though he refused to speak further after being pressed by local reporters. Friends later said he slept with a shotgun in his lap for months afterward. Similar reports come from the Louisiana lowlands. Fishermen along Bayou Lafourche tell of nets hauled in, ripped like razors, and of strange patches of cold water snaking between the boats on calm nights. Once, two teenagers, returning from a frog hunt after dark, saw something emerge from the water. Tall, covered in reeds, with an open oval where its face should have been. They arrived home hours later, hysterical, with their pirogue half filled with muddy water. The family burned the boat in the yard that same night, refusing to leave it there another day. Stranger still are the persistent stories of people who disappear, only to return days later altered. In 1972, a young man named Jacob Frey disappeared while camping along the Angelina River with college friends. They found his tent ripped open from the inside, personal belongings scattered as if he had fled in panic. A search party scoured the area for 4 days without a trace. On the 5th morning, Jacob staggered back to camp naked, his feet grazed by thorns, his eyes ringed with bruises that never completely faded. He could not explain his absence except to mutter about singing trees and a face like wet moss. He never spoke publicly about it again, though his mother confided to a neighbor that he sometimes woke screaming, clawing at his throat. Researchers who chart these events on timelines observe that certain clusters seem to peak every few decades, as if something buried resurfaces to savor the air. Interestingly, these incidents often coincide with local festivals, the kind that blend religious processions with slightly pagan overtones. Harvest fairs in Texas towns still feature stalls selling twisted straw charms said to bring fortune, while in Louisiana, candle-lit flotillas glide across small lakes during summer feasts, their participants oblivious or perhaps resigned to the possibility that not all who gather to watch are human. Modern culture explores these uncomfortable legacies with relish. Popular streaming anthologies set episodes on sunny Texas farms or sunken Louisiana towns, always presenting glimpses of something ancient beneath the surface. Marketing teams weave regional legends into everything from horror escape rooms to collectible card games, trading authenticity for spectacle. Yet for every corporate exploitation, there are quiet local revivals. Small theater companies staging ghost plays based on local court records, art collectives creating installations incorporating real soil from contested sites. In these works, the line between reverence and fear blurs as participants seek to both honor and contain the past. This tension manifests itself most vividly in family stories that refuse to die. A woman named Lisette Armand, who lives outside Lake Charles, keeps a worn diary passed down from generation to generation. The earliest entries detail simple observations: weather, births, short prayers. By the 1940s, however, pages record more troubling incidents. Shutters banged on windless nights, neighbors spotted in the yard only to disappear when approached, cattle found with strange burns spiraling up their flanks. The last scribbled note, dated July 1963, reads simply, "He's watching from the sugarcane field. I told the children never to answer if he calls." Similar diaries also exist in Texas. An old scrapbook found in the attic of a Tyler hotel contained yellowed news clippings about missing farm workers, interspersed with pressed flowers, each labeled with names written in a child's shaky handwriting. One sheet bore a reddish stain, crusted so thick it sealed the page beneath. Attempts to test the substance decades later yielded inconclusive results, though a lab technician privately noted that it behaved peculiarly under reagent. Not quite blood, not quite sap. The deeper we delve into these family sagas, the more they intertwine, weaving across state lines into a knot of shared dread. At reunions, it's not uncommon for distant cousins from the Texas and Louisiana branches to swap stories over beers, nervously joking about great-aunts who insisted on wearing black veils even indoors, or uncles who kept jugs of river water under their beds. The laughter often dies quickly, replaced by sidelong glances at darkened windows. Perhaps this is why, even today, in an age of satellites and infinite digital eyes, people continue to practice small rituals whose origins they can no longer fully articulate. Young couples may sprinkle salt on new thresholds because mommy did it, without ever asking why. Children still learn to look away from certain hollows in ancient oak trees, or to spit twice if they accidentally step on a coiled rope left on the ground. The logic behind these acts is shaky, but their persistence suggests a subterranean understanding that danger doesn't always announce itself in ways science can easily catalog. So, as we stand here together, peering into these tangled bloodlines and the silent legacies they protect, I must ask, what do you make of all this? Have you ever felt, even for a moment, that chill run down your shoulders like no breeze could? Do you come from a family with stories kept in polite silence, only surfaced in whispers when the house is dark? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories, your local legends, your little household superstitions that keep you a little safer at night. And if you're feeling increasingly drawn into these dark tales with me, consider subscribing, not as a fan, but as a fellow traveler through the sinister corridors of America's forgotten cultures. There's so much more to discover, and I'd hate for you to miss the next revelation waiting just around the corner. There's a stretch of road that cuts through dense pine trees near the Texas-Louisiana border, an old two-lane strip of cracked asphalt known on local maps as County Route 1478, though most locals simply call it Hollow Road. It winds for 25 miles between Sabine County and a nearly forgotten cluster of buildings called Briar Hollow, which even the most detailed atlases often omit. At first glance, it's unremarkable. Pine needles cover the shoulders, kudzu drapes the occasional rusty fence, and deer have been known to dart out unexpectedly, their hooves echoing sharply on the cracked surface. But for decades, truckers and hunters have reported oddities that distort the ordinary into something subtly sinister. In the winter of 1979, a forestry crew driving past after dark described seeing a row of figures standing shoulder to shoulder at the side of the road. Each held a flashlight, but their heads were unnaturally low, their chins pressed to their chests. As the truck approached, all the flashlights went out simultaneously, plunging the road into a suffocating darkness that made their headlights appear to fail. When they stopped to investigate at dawn, nothing remained but faint circular scorch marks on the ground where each figure had stood. Further complicating the hollow way's dismal reputation are the scattered remains of way stations and small farmsteads, some dating back to the 1850s, now reduced to foundations choked by brambles. A family named Holt ran a modest stagecoach stop along this route. Their ledger, discovered by an amateur historian in the 1990s, contains routine entries about travelers' food and meal costs, but changes abruptly in the final pages. The last entry, dated June 4, 1887, reads, 2 sleepless nights. The road is singing. Martha says not to answer, keeping lanterns burning. After that, the Holt family seems to disappear from all regional records. Census takers, tax collectors, and even church records make no further mention of them, as if they had simply vanished, leaving only that scrawled notice behind. The remains of their property, identifiable by a collapsed stone well and an iron bedstead half swallowed by the earth, still attract the curious. Locals advise against visiting, though when pressed, they rarely offer more than a murmur. It's not a place you forget.